All right, everybody, welcome to episode 1 of the Fear the Lord podcast. My name is Tom Zuzolo. This is my mother, Mary Jane Zuzolo. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I We're doing this as a family because we are.
But you're the star.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a great niece of Sister Marie de Saint Pierre, and she was the young French Carmelite nun who had been given revelations from Christ or messages from Christ to initiate the Holy Face devotion in the 1840s, and so
It was once quite popular, my understanding, but it's,
yes.
fallen victim to some of the modern traps,
Hmm.
and we want to bring it back partially through this podcast. Mom wrote an amazing book that one of the few books I've read recently. I really got a lot out of it. I'm actually rereading it now. But a lot of people, they don't learn through books anymore, and that's just the way the times are. I'm kind of one of those people. I like to watch things, I like to learn through podcasts. And so we said, you know what? This is a devotion that is in our family where, I believe mom is the most knowledgeable person on this devotion. I said, why don't we just, set up a little podcast, start talking about it? And so I guess that kind of leads into the first question of what is the Holy Face devotion? What is a devotion maybe in the first place as well?
Yeah.
Talk
Tom's
about
a
that.
little biased, by the way, but thank you nonetheless.
I'm going to be hyping up my mom throughout the podcast no matter what. And you can say, oh, well, you're giving, there will be haters. Who cares? It's my mom. I'm going to hype her up.
Well, thank you. Well, yeah, that's actually a good question. What is a devotion? A lot of people maybe aren't that familiar with them. I think before the Second Vatican Council, people were much more familiar with them. Uh, they're just popular forms of piety that help draw the faithful closer to Christ, largely focusing on his life and especially maybe his passion. And so like the way of the cross, certainly the rosary, even Eucharistic pilgrimages, and then there's kind of several devotions that are centered on the sacred humanity of Christ, like the heart, and of course there's the Immaculate Heart, the Sacred Heart of, and then Divine Mercy centers a lot on the Passion of Christ, and we have ones to the wounds of Christ, to His blood, and then we had the
And we
Holy
got the Holy
Face.
Face.
Yeah, and so we will be talking about the Holy Face, and eventually down the road we can talk about how all these others tie into the Holy Face, and how complementary they are and how they kind of fit perfectly together. But
So a devotion is kind of like a more structured way of prayer and promised more benefits. It's kind of like the difference between just eating whatever you want and eating a specific diet in a way, maybe something like
that's
that.
a good analogy, actually. Yes, and you bring up good point. There's promises attached to these devotions, and I think that's to draw the people in, to get them to contemplate these different aspects of Christ's life through these various forms of piety or prayers or whatever. But then the idea, so you know God in that sense, and then you love Him because you just keep coming back to the devotion and probably forget what the promises even were in the first place. And then, serving the Lord too, they all ask in some way for us to collaborate with Christ in the salvation of sinners. And so, there's kind of a big emphasis on co-redemption in that way. And
Now
so,
what now what about the Holy Face devotion itself? Why are we talking about that, especially in these times?
mhm.
Um, my understanding is that we are especially called towards the Holy Face devotion in these times because of the rampant blasphemy that we're
Mhm.
dealing with in our culture, from the movies to the music. And I get swept up in it too. I try not to say the Lord's name in vain, but even listening to music that is blasphemous is kind of just as bad, honestly. And I should
Mhm.
really work on that. And, uh, you know, all these things, it's especially vital in our time, I think, to start talking about blasphemy because it's kind of the forgotten sin, I think, at least for me. um, I got swept up into the modern idea that, God is just this kind of lazy, loving hippie, essentially. And he doesn't get angry or anything like that. But I kind of snapped out of it at a certain point when I got a little older, and I realized, you know, I might be going to hell. Like I'm not. I'm kind of making God upset about some things, and you know, not to be dramatic, but I think we all have to remember that fear of the Lord is real, and it's the path to wisdom. Why is the holy face so important in relation to all this?
Okay, it was actually given shortly after the time of the French Revolution, and that's really was the catalyst of a lot of the blasphemy that is now just endemic in our culture. And Christ said even at that time that iniquity had never reached such a degree. And
And that was in the 1800s. So
yes,
imagine today the levels we see. We see open, blatant blasphemy, just anything to offend Christians. It's honestly upsetting to even a Christian. And you got to think, how does God feel about all that? If I'm sitting here as a Catholic and I see, you know, some stupid musician making a mockery of my faith, how do you think God feels about that? And we need to, my understanding is we need to not only avoid blasphemy ourselves, but part of this devotion is to make reparation for these blasphemies.
that's right. Yes. Yeah, because it's kind of we have a almost a categorically different time in terms of blasphemy, and Christ described it in the Revelations as deep rooted impiety and absolute incredulity. So, in other words, just a refusal to believe almost anything related to the faith, and uh, you know, the times are overtly anti-God, and so man is either doubting or rejecting God's laws of morality and truth to the point of inventing his own. And
Now, I will say, I think there's a subcategory of my generation that sees this and is really running to the faith because of this. And I think that's another reason why we wanted to make this podcast to, you know, reach some of those people who they see, you know, maybe they watch the music awards or they watch, I know I keep harping on music, there's so many other things as well, but they see what's going on and they say we need to have honor for the Lord. We need to be afraid. Honestly, we should be more fearful of the Lord, I think, as a culture, and I especially include myself in that. I'm not saying that, you know, whoa, you know, I'm above anybody else or anything, but I guess that's leads me into the next question: is if we're dealing in these times, and my understanding is at a time this devotion was extremely popular, why have most people not heard of this devotion in these times? Why has it been so suppressed? What's going on?
okay, yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a couple things going on. It was initially very popular. I'm not going to get into the details of this right now, but there were thousands of documented miracles associated with this devotion at the hands of Venerable DuPont, and
Pope
that
Leo the 13th was a big fan as well, right?
yes, and he's the one that
Saint
actually.
Therese.
Yes, that's right.
Sorry, I'm getting
No,
ahead
no,
of you.
that's
I
okay.
I get excited when I learn how popular this used to be. But sorry, mom.
Yes. Oh no, that's okay. And kind of along those lines, I'll just mention that Teresa of Avila, came way before this devotion, but she appeared to Sister Marie de Saint Pierre and said that she was a protectress of the devotion and that it would be the honor of Carmel. And you mentioned Saint Therese. Saint Therese later came along after this devotion. She was one of the first members of the Arch Confraternity. We'll get into that in a moment, hopefully. And but it's interesting because she really was in love with the wounded face of Christ. She was in love with its devotion, but it wasn't Teresa of Avila or Saint Therese of Lisieux or John of the Cross or Elizabeth of the Trinity, any of these that were the honor of Carmel or to be the honor of Carmel, but the devotion itself. And I think a big part of that is that it is a deep spirituality and it's really in line with the Carmelite mystical tradition. And so, but to get back to your question about,
Yeah,
you
where
know,
did it go? If it was so great, why aren't we seeing it anymore? What happened? It's almost
right.
like it makes you wonder. Maybe the devil specifically targeted this devotion because he, you know, saw the momentum. You know,
He,
what happened, mom?
yeah, actually, in the Revelations, Christ did warn more than once that the devil would do everything in his power to stamp out the devotion. And that kind of ties, in my mind, in with Leo the 13th's vision of Satan challenging Christ that he could destroy the church if given enough time and enough power over those under him. And it's interesting, I'll double check to make sure, but I believe it was only 2 months after this vision that Leo the 13th initiated the approval of the devotion, and it was just right at a year that he approved it as an arch confraternity for the whole world, all peoples and all times. So it
So
was
that's pretty unconventional. It was
it
like a
is
almost like an emergency release.
exactly, yeah, and he is the also the same pope that that composed the Saint Michael prayer, and that was said after every low mass for decades. And
Let me tell you something. I always heard my mom harping on this devotion and saying, because it's our ancestor who was Sister Mary, and I kind of, I was a teen. I was thinking, I'm 26 now, by the way, but I was like, okay, it is what it is. But then when I heard about how popular it was and how Pope Leo the 13th was such a huge proponent of it, I was kind of sad. I was like, why? How did this get lost to time? And I never realized how kind of, I guess, credible it was. I
mhm.
kind of thought that it may have been one of those things where sometimes people get a little off track and they kind of just start spinning a yarn with, new prayers and new ideas and stuff like that. And so I kind of was wondering if it was one of those things. But after I realized how credible it was, I really started to take more interest in it.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that was one thing I
Yeah,
learned that I didn't even know as my mom, being her mom, my mom.
yeah, and actually, I had a similar experience. I was one of 8 children. We grew up knowing that the devotion was there, and that a little of the history of Sister Marie de Saint Pierre, but not very much. And I later understood it's because my mom at the time, this was just after Vatican II, she was actually discouraged from researching more into the devotion. Everybody tried to tell her it was outdated because one of the main thrusts of the devotion is to defeat communism. And so I want to say she didn't talk a lot about it. She was very guarded about it. And
Mm.
then it was really only after my grandfather died, and he had all these old books that a lot of them came from France that were handed down to him. And I realized how many books there had been written on the devotion. Now, sadly, they were all in French except for one that was translated by the Carmelites in New Orleans into English, and they actually inscribed that to my great great
The
grandfather.
only French word I know is hors d'oeuvre.
Oh, right. It would have helped us to know more about that language for sure. And so, but then, this was before the time of the internet. And then
Hmm.
once the internet came on board, actually, your dad, he researched that main book that was in English. It was a very long autobiography of Sister Marie de Saint Pierre. And then, later we were able to discover that, like, some shorter abbreviated versions, like the Golden Arrow, uh, they were out there. And but that's what got the ball rolling, was to realize, well, this is a legit devotion. And it's so strange that not only did I not know about it, but I'm telling you, no one in my life up to a certain age had heard of it except for my family members.
Wow.
And that was
So it
very
was almost
discouraging.
completely
It
suppressed.
was,
There was
yes.
only really just one little thread left, and now I would say I've noticed there's starting to be more momentum again,
Yes.
especially again due to modern culture. I guess that would lead me into another question of what are some examples of blasphemy in our modern culture that some people may not even realize that some things are as blasphemous
Yeah.
as they are.
Well, really, we have the Ten Commandments, and the first three are to do with the rights of God. And so offenses against those really encapsulate what blasphemy is on one level, and then there's kind of a deeper level, even. And we'll just give some quick examples. So, the first commandment, I am the Lord thy God. You shall not have strange gods before me. So, literally, we aren't to worship Satan or any form of idolatry of false gods. But obviously, we can make gods out of social media, money, sex, whatever.
A lot
And
of guys my age are worshiping women.
yeah,
Got to
I
be
know.
honest.
Yeah,
Between the OnlyFans and honestly even their wives, I got to be real.
it
It's kind of becoming a problem actually, and
yeah,
I won't go into that though. That's
yeah.
that's not really the topic of discussion. But
No.
anyway, back on track.
So that's one level of that commandment, and then the next commandment, do not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. So literally, don't misuse the name of God in any way. Uh, People get upset, and instead, that's the first thing they do is they abuse the name of God in some form. But also, we really need to avoid substitutions. And I know, you know, even I was inclined to say, "Oh my goodness," if I were startled or whatever. But
Hmm.
really, it's a form of the same thing, because we all know what it that is taking the place of. And it's just like, oh, I really, I can't stand that substitution for that terrible word. Sometimes people say freaking, and I think, just don't say that, because everybody knows what the other word is, and that you, in a sense, are referencing that word. And so the same is true. Just don't use any substitutions.
That's
Just,
something I got to work on.
but I think everybody
Mom's
has to work it.
always, when I come here and visit, I always get in it. I always get in a little trouble because I'll say something that's a little bit off base, or maybe more than a little bit off base. So yeah, mom's been helping me lock in with that as well. But
Hmm.
yeah, you're right. We all and realistically, it's like it's not that hard to just
No, it's
say something else,
yeah. I mean,
or
people can adopt all these exercise regimes and diets and stuff, and if you can do that, you can
it's a
do,
good
yeah,
habit. And honestly, I think even if you're not religious, it kind of makes you seem more respectable if you keep your cool and you're not always freaking out and saying crazy things all the time.
right.
It just kind of makes you seem like a respectable person.
Yeah, and honestly, it kind of dumbs down a person. And I just read a good article. Maybe we'll do this on one of the podcasts. It's the psychological and spiritual damage of even just profanity. And so this kind of goes along with that. But then the third commandment that has to do with the rights of God. Keep holy the Sabbath. And so again, literally, you need to make sure that you're going to mass, and but also, just setting the day aside, as a special day, a day of prayer outside of mass too. And obviously, getting together with family, friends, all that is good. um, Doing things that you enjoy, as long as it doesn't take away from your time of worship. I've heard people bring up the example of, well, what if you just, and I should say, we are to avoid manual labor, but on this day. But people say, well, what if I were, truly love to mow the lawn?
Mm.
I look forward to that all week long, and I just, it's relaxing for me to mow the lawn on Sunday. Well, okay, at one level, but really we need to think of a couple other things. One, are we being scandalous in this? Like, for example, maybe you really do feel that way, but your neighbor who sees you doesn't know that, and they think, well, they're God-fearing people, but they're mowing their lawn on Sunday. It must be okay, and I'm going to start doing that. So that's one
Mm.
level. And then the other level is, we really need to avoid making others work on Sunday, or taking them away from proper time of worship and so forth. And so, it's best to not eat out on Sunday. It's best to really keep those kinds of activities to a minimum.
Man,
Um,
I
you
gotta
know,
be honest. I think I do all of these things right now.
well,
So I gotta shape up. I'll be listening to this podcast as well. I'll be taking notes after this because it's from my perspective, and maybe to give a little bit of an argument against what you're saying.
mhm,
It is kind of one of those things where the culture is it's it's making it harder and harder not to do some of these things.
mhm,
A lot of people. I used to be somebody who only ate out. I didn't even cook for myself, and
mhm,
So it's like, what am I going to do? Just not eat on Sunday? Of course, I could have cooked for myself, but I'm just bringing up arguments that some would
Sure.
make. Some would say, well, I literally can't afford to pay all my bills if I take Sundays off.
Mm-hmm.
I am probably, I've had times in my life where I feel that way. And, what about like exercise? Is exercise okay on Sunday? Is that
Yeah,
something?
I would think again it's best to not involve others working if you're doing it,
Mm,
and but if that's something that you truly enjoy and that helps you, exercise should go along with your spiritual life, and so in and of itself it's not bad. I know what Tom's saying. It's very complicated because, like I said, that blasphemy is just so endemic that people don't really even recognize
yeah.
Sunday as a different day. And so we just do what we can and try to be a good example to others. But, really think through things. And if you have a good question about it, maybe talk to your parish priest and try to understand that, a game plan to,
So if you're, sorry to cut
oh,
you
yeah,
off.
no.
If you're somebody like me, what's a good who you probably have multiple infractions on a given Sunday. What's a good way to start? What's the maybe first step you can take
Hmm.
to you don't want to get caught into the comfort of the illusion of progress, but what would be a good first step to?
I think most important is that making, and I know you always go to mass on Sunday. Make sure that you are doing that, and make sure that your mindset overall is geared toward God on Sunday, and uh, you know you're so motivated with your exercise, and I know that you've done that in stages, and so maybe kind of look at it the same way, like okay, if I can do what's most important first and really hone into that, and then start working on other infractions, as you put it. uh, but
Okay.
it's really liberating, and again, God gave the Sabbath to man, for his sake, that is for man's sake, not necessarily for God's sake. So it is really good for us. It's
Yeah.
spiritually and psychologically good for us.
Yeah, I shouldn't think of it as giving up something. I should think of it as I will be gaining a new day that I can do new things on.
Mhm.
And I get caught up into the traps of modern society just as much as I think most people do, and so it does seem a little daunting, honestly, to say, okay, Sunday I have to completely purify my day. But honestly, it's one of those things where we have to do what is right. We can't say, oh, it's too hard. I mean, it's not too hard.
No,
It's just something we don't want to do. I don't really want to, but it is what it is. I'm gonna have to start pulling it together with that. But
definitely.
all right, sorry about that. We had to take a quick cut. This is our first podcast. But mom, continue, please.
Okay, so yeah, so the ideologies can be very blasphemous too, and the communism, for example, was specifically mentioned in the Revelations, even though it was months prior to it being published by or the Communist Manifesto being published by Karl Marx. And so
Hmm.
that's kind of remarkable that that happened prior to the formal introduction of communism, you might say. And so
Interesting.
the problem originated really with the Enlightenment, where reason was considered the arbiter of truth, almost like in a vacuum. And again, this took the place of the absolute authority of God in their minds, and then eventually this kind of tied in with modernistic thought, which even introduces subjective notions into truth. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we're all familiar with relativism, in which there's no objective truth or morality. It's your truth, my truth. And then finally we have wokeism, and I would say in many respects that's an inversion of the truth and morality as outlined in moral law and the Ten Commandments, and that's sort of preserved in the doctrine of the faith. And
Some of the woke stuff, it's almost like opposite day.
it is, and there's always kind of like a feigned compassion. We'll take the topic of abortion, for example, like, oh, you can't do this to the mother. She's unprepared. This is terrible for her to go through this. Well, no mention of the rights of the fetus. And so, there's always kind of this feigned notion of compassion, but it's really, it's everything is on its head.
It's like weaponized compassion.
Yeah, it is. And, I think we can remember in Isaiah, woe to those that call good evil and evil good. I might have that flipped in order how he says it. But
And the road to hell was paved with good intentions.
yes, that's right. That's right. And so, but anything in which any ideology in which we are effectively making ourselves a god, that is blasphemous. And again, communism that's really designed upon atheistic principles. It's designed to stamp out the religion and the image of God in man, and it does this by removing individual rights and freedoms and attacking religion and the nuclear family, which is really the basis for Christian society. And I'm always remembering a couple quotes that kind of bring this to light. Marx said communism begins with atheism at the outset. And then Lenin said that communism does abolish all eternal truths and religion and morality. And by the way, he did say that the goal of socialism is communism. So I think we need to really wake up and think about that. And again, the result is an upside down morality. But the good news is that the Holy Face devotion is designed to repair these offenses by establishing, proper fear of the Lord again, and bringing man back to respect for God's authority and truth and morality.
It's
Yeah.
it's almost like fear of the Lord is the keystone that protects from all of these issues. And when you start to think of God as a happy-go-lucky hippie, it's almost like it starts to make it easier to justify all these other things. And then it makes you wonder if there was an intention of, why the devil may tempt us so frequently to forget that God is powerful and can be angered by blasphemy. And it's almost like God's anger can protect us in a way by keeping us on track. We shouldn't look at it as just him crashing out on us for no reason. It's more like, when you don't respect me, you're going to deal with communism and socialism and
Exactly.
wokeism and atheism and all these things. And I would say the thing that really got me to focus on this devotion was realizing that almost all of our problems that I'm facing in modern society come from this idea that we don't really need to think about God. You're allowed to believe in him, but you're not allowed to profess his strength and his, anger at times. And of course he has mercy too. But you covered in your book, that's mercy comes with justice. It's hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And I think that the important thing to remember to combat all these things, from what I've learned from Mom, is that it all kind of starts with reverence. We have to be reverent to the name of God, the Holy Face, the whole package. We have to be reverent. We have to bring that back, I think.
I think so. And you reminded me of an important point. In the Revelations, Christ said, as we did mention, that Satan would do everything in his power to stamp out the devotion. But he also explained that Satan willingly delegates other categories of sin, but he keeps those of blasphemy to himself. So that's how attached he is to
Say
the
that
sin.
again, Mom.
Okay, so Satan willingly delegates other categories of sin, but he keeps those of blasphemy to himself. And so this is not something he's going to give up on easily. And so we can understand what an extreme offense our blasphemy and our ideologies are to God. And in the devotion, we understand that these are both extreme offenses to God, but they are also merciful chastisements allowed by God to bring us back into reality. We're kind of like the Old Testament Israelites, that we get off track, and in his mercy he gave them just chastisements to call them back.
One of the things that really brought me back into the Catholic faith was actually seeing the blasphemy, because I always believed in God, and I was obviously brought up Catholic. But I at times would wonder, how do we know that the Catholic faith is the real faith? And aside from all the historical things, you really have to ask yourself, what is the faith that is constantly being mocked, constantly being
Hmm.
ridiculed by these demonic forces? And it's obviously Jesus Christ and the
Hmm.
Catholic faith. You can't find another religion that is really mocked on the same level.
Hmm.
And to me, that's kind of compelling evidence that of the truth of it, because why would the devil tempt us so greatly to blasphemy and to ridicule if it weren't real, if you
Hmm.
know? And so I think that's kind of a compelling
Hmm.
thing to think about as well. But you mentioned the devotion being given after the French Revolution.
Hmm.
Many would wonder why the French Revolution was so offensive to God, and how it's different from the American Revolution, and why is the why was the devotion given during that time, and why is the French Revolution so important?
Okay. So, yeah, I mean that's a good question. A lot of people, I think, in this day and age, they just they group all the revolutions together, and they think they were all a great thing. Um, and let's just take the difference between the American and the French revolutions. They both were a rejection of the monarchy. They both, because of legitimate concerns, mainly for taxation, but
I
especially
would revolt against these taxes, honestly. In the current
I
times, sign me
I
up for the
understand.
revolution.
Yeah. So, but there was also, especially for the Americans, the subject of religious liberty. And again, the French, well, really, in fairness, both revolutions were fueled by some of the ideals of the Enlightenment, heavy emphasis on reason, but also on liberty and justice for man. But so these grievances, they went about it in radically different ways. The American Revolution really was grounded on God and traditional rights and order, and they didn't have the desire to tear down society, but rather to restore, proper justice and liberty. It, it was an ordered liberty that they sought, and so that's why they had their constitutional republic with the checks and balances, and there was this emphasis on religious liberty. But the French Revolution, on the other hand, and I understand it was kind of a complicated setup. The parish priests and the priests close to the people were not subject to this exclusion, but some of the hierarchy, the bishops and the higher ups in the church were in France excluded from some of the taxes. And so the people just kind of grouped the Catholic Church in with the monarchy in their minds. And,
Hmm.
so this was, uh, they ended by executing clergy, desecrating churches. It was a rejection of God and Catholicism, tradition and order, all in lieu of kind of this radical, complete societal change under what they called the cult of reason. And so, we had the success of the American Revolution, but really the French Revolution, they just ended swapping one tyranny for another. And, they did have the unjust executions under the Reign of Terror, the civil wars, chaos. Bonaparte was emperor for life, and it really wasn't until the Third Republic that things kind of settled down.
Hmm.
But again, this was endemic blasphemy, and they used cathedrals for temples of reason. And Voltaire, who was really inspirational for the revolutionaries, let's not forget his motto was "Let us crush the infamous thing," and sadly, he was referring to Christ and his church. And
Hmm.
so, they, because they didn't have God and order in the forefront, their liberty collapsed into tyranny. And so when we have this reason that's without the guardrails of natural law and the experience of history, it does lead to these wild abstractions. And so, yeah, the main thing was that endemic blasphemy.
And would you say that is kind of when blasphemy really got started?
Yeah, I would say that that was, after the Reformation, there was a hatred for the vicar of Christ, but I think with the French Revolution, some of the inspiration there was a hatred for Christ himself, a hatred for the church itself. And so, yeah, and it just, it's never really gotten back. It was like
Mm-hmm.
let out.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we're still dealing with it, and certainly in our country we are.
If I guess that would lead me to wonder if the French Revolution had this devotion, and that's when it started, and it warranted chastisement by God. What does that mean for our current times? I think we
Hmm.
might be dealing with already some chastisement, and it makes you wonder if that is from some of our open rejection of God as a culture, because you may be personally on some level in line with God, but if your culture is just running amok, it makes you wonder. So what does that mean for our current culture?
Hmm.
Because we learned about the past. Now we got to look at what's
Right.
going on now.
Well, sadly, I would say that we are in effect already being chastised, and there's probably a lot more to come. And what do
Mm.
I mean by that? Again, I mentioned earlier the Israelites, and they would they would offend God terribly, with irreverence, idolatry, and so forth. And so God would turn his face from them, so to speak, in just chastisement. And I always remember in Psalm 81, God says, let them go by their heart's desire. Uh, they shall walk in their own inventions. And so then they would realize what they'd done, because they were suffering the effects of their collective choices. It was just like
Mm-hmm.
a natural a natural thing that happened. And then they did make reparation. And so I think we are experiencing the natural consequences of our
Mm-hmm.
collective choices. And, again, almost every aspect of our modern culture, uh, at some level, is embracing blasphemy. And but the good news is that, we do have this devotion, which is so powerful. God, or Christ, actually referred to it as the greatest devotion. And I think that, I mentioned how he said that iniquity had never reached such a degree. And, so the greatest devotion is needed to make reparation for the greatest offenses. And also, I talked about the devotions being centered on the sacred humanity of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is certainly, we can see his wounded face there, from the Veil of Veronica, when he suffered his passion. But in the devotion, Christ made clear that the face, is also to represent the face of the church or its doctrine, and it's supposed to represent the Godhead itself. And
Mm.
we're reminded, St. Paul said, the head of God. I'm sorry, the head of Christ is God, and so it's kind of a similar thing.
Wow.
And it's the devotion is in union with, uh, Christ in the most holy sacrament of the altar. And so it's very powerful. We'll get into this later, but we're actually using his merits, and that's what makes it so powerful. We're not using just our own. We're cooperating, but we're using his merits that are sort of residing in his wounded face. And so this is a spirituality of reparation and co-redemption, and it addresses, it's for the people engaged in the seriousness of the age. And it gives us a way to hope, and a means for us to assist Christ in reclaiming all. So it's something we can actually do, and it's
Mm-hmm.
more powerful than anything else we can do. So it's very important. And it complements Fatima, in that it's a battle plan to assist Our Lady in the war against evil. And so all this is sort of a selfless endeavor on our part, in a sense, except for we're saving our own society. But something that we'll hopefully get into another time is that really, because it does sort of condense the understanding of the great Carmelite mystics and true devotion to Mary. It's a very Marian devotion as well, and because of the promises that are attached to the devotion, it's a really valuable aid in man's own salvation
Mm.
too.
Well, you said that the devil has a specific desire to keep the sins of blasphemy to himself. In the same way, we have to imagine that this devotion is very close to Christ in a way that he probably really
Hmm.
wants people to start to adopt this mindset more. And if that is such an important sin to the devil, then the reparations of the devotion are probably very important to the ways of our times, and the feelings that God has towards our progress as a humanity. And
Hmm.
yeah.
That's right, and that's a very important point. Christ reveals that it's of huge consolation to his heart when we practice this devotion. And so you're right that because he said that blasphemy wounds his heart more than any other crime. So if we're repairing that wound, then that's going to bring, such great consolation to him.
So part of this devotion is to collectively repair some of the collective sins of the culture. It's
Hmm.
not just a devotion that's about I'm going to improve my spirituality. It's a more, if you could almost say, a socialist devotion in a sense. Well, not exactly. That's
Yeah.
kind of a bad way to use that term, but
Uh-huh.
it's something that's more communal in a sense, that
Hmm.
we're trying to repair the sanctity that we hold for God, and we're trying to bring the culture back to a better place. And even if we just slightly improve the way that the culture treats God, that would have a huge impact on.
Yes, it's all a ripple effect, and actually, that it some of the things that were revealed in the revelations are kind of shocking. This devotion is supposed to help convert the multitudes, and so that's very powerful. And we that's what we need. We need to convert the masses in large part. And so that's what we can do. And again, it's everything that we can do. We all get frustrated that there's not more physically we can do to change the culture, but we can give our example as best we can of trying to live the life that Christ wants us to, and we can practice this devotion, and obviously devotion to Our Lady, and it all goes together. But this is so central for our times.
Wow. Wow. So we have to repair the culture. And why do we need, this might be a little off track, but why couldn't we just do it one man at a time? Some people would say just focus on yourself, just do the best you can do. Why
Mhm.
is it important for us to almost make a group reparation for the culture? Does that even work?
Yeah, I mean, certainly our own example, and one person at a time is so important. But I think that Christ, in explaining that iniquity has never reached such a degree, I think he feels uh, that it is appropriate and pleasing that we take more, that there's more skin in the game on our part, because we collectively have made this the worst most
Yeah.
offensive time. So we need to jump in there and try to do our part of collaborating with Christ.
And if you don't believe that, blasphemy leads us down the wrong path, all you got to look at is the past 50 years. And with all due respect to the boomers, many would say that they kind of ruined the culture a little bit.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people in my generation feel like they kind of didn't do very good with their time. And a lot of that really boils down to they just completely rejected God, and they completely rejected any sort of fear of God. And of course, there were some people from the older generation who still believed in God, but I would say by and large, it kind of turned into a religion of honestly hippies.
Hmm.
People just saying, "Oh yeah, let's just hold hands and sing together in church," and that's kind of all we got to do. We just have to be
Hmm.
happy and be love and whatever.
Right.
And I think that when you look at the downstream effects of those things, now we're dealing with the crazy social and dating market in our generation, the crazy economics of our generation, the uh, obviously this isn't an economics podcast, but
Hmm.
we deal with the downstream effects now. And of course, I'm not saying all older people are at fault,
Hmm.
but it is kind of interesting to me that you can actually see this happen in real time. You don't
Hmm.
have to take your word for it. You can just look at the rejections that the older generations made in the past collectively. Of
Hmm.
course, there were some good and some bad, but collectively there were some regressions made, and now we live in a godless culture that's kind of stale and kind of corporate, and it's not very beautiful even. It's
Hmm.
kind of ugly. You go to the strip malls and you're like, what happened? Where's the nice little shops? Where's the diners? And um I don't know. I find that especially compelling to think about how if we could bring back the fear of God and the devotion, we would start to repair society
Hmm.
in that would come from God's favor starting to reflect back into our society, because I think he can't work with what we don't want him to work with. If we
Hmm.
reject him, he's not going to infuse his light into our society, and I fear that maybe that's happened. What do you think?
I think so, and I think this is maybe a good way to kind of tie back in to the beginning and end things for today, and that is, you asked what happened, why haven't we heard of this devotion? And we talked about that, and I think that we are seeing the effects of ignoring this devotion. And I think, certainly there are other areas that we've neglected, but I think the neglection of this devotion, which was meant to get us back in track, and in fact, even before the Leo the 13th approved the Archconfraternity, Pius the Ninth said at the devotion that uh, he felt it was destined to save society.
Mm.
So we've neglected it, and now we have this society that is just a mess. And yet, we'll end with a hopeful tone, and that
Yeah,
is,
give us some hope, Mom.
yeah, that we have this devotion, and it's good to know about it more, to practice it to the best of your ability, and we're going to get into all that. There's so much to talk about. I don't think we can ever truly run out of
Oh
content,
yeah.
and we're going to try to do this about once a week.
We're
And
going to do it once a
yeah,
week.
Tom, he's really
Mom
pushing
gets a
me.
little nervous. Mom wants to get everything right. She's a perfectionist, and I'm probably not as much a perfectionist. I just want to, make progress at all costs, and so I'm gonna be doing it with or without her. No, and I'm just kidding. I know that would not be good. So, but I warned her. I said, if you don't show up, I'm gonna have to do it by myself, and that made her really nervous because I
Well,
don't even know what to talk about.
I have to give Tom credit on two fronts, that really he, more than anyone else, was responsible for me wanting to research and write the book. And there is another book that I plan to write, but he also, I would say he's probably the only one on the planet that could have talked me into doing
There
this
you go.
podcast. And so twice over, I thank you.
Well, I thank you, Mom. You did a great job, and we'll iron out some of the issues in the next episode. I know I kind of interrupted you a few times. That was bad
No.
on my part, and you did a great job. I don't think you need to improve on anything. We'll iron things out, we'll make it better, and then we're also going to go into more specific topics in the next few episodes, because this was kind of an over introduction episode. We didn't
Hmm.
want to, you know, just go into something kind of niche all of a sudden. We kind of actually planned out some of the talking points in this episode. But then in the next episodes, we'll go into more specific things and talk about more kind of fun stuff. I'm excited. I think we're going to have some
I am
fun.
too.
And, if you want to watch this episode, it's a great way to catch up to speed. Also, Mom's book. It has everything covered. What's it called again?
Unveiling the Sixth Station of the Cross, Reparation to the Holy Face, Mother of all Devotions. Here's my tattered copy. You
That's
can-
Mom's copy. There you go. So it will not look like this.
Yeah, you'll get a fresh copy if you had ever ordered one.
But yeah, I mean, this isn't supposed to really even be too much about the book. We want it to
Yeah.
be independent because I think also, I do think that it's not entirely something that we have to convince everybody to be on board with the devotion. Even if we just start to convince more people to have some reverence and fear of the Lord, I think that's a great way to start. And it's how I'm going to be starting as well. As you know, I still have some infractions that I've been not living up to Mom's standard with. So
Tom's very humble, and he's not telling the full story. He's a fantastic person, and he just gets
the
better
next
and better.
episode is about how fantastic I am. Don't worry, we'll cover that in episode 2. No, I'm just kidding. All right, well, thanks everybody for watching. Thank you for the people who've already been supporting our progress on this. Anybody you want to shout out?
Oh, sure. Byron Bullock and the Armada group. I can explain more about that. Our league members. I haven't actually told Father Carney about this, but I'm sure he would be very supportive. He's so kind. And Jewel Lane and many others. There's a lot of good friends that Ted and Joanne in Canada with the Armada group. So many others.
Dad's been helping as well, helping
Oh,
us set
yeah.
up the studio, and we're using his basement. So,
I
big
couldn't
shout out
do
to Dad.
anything without Mike, and then the whole family has really been very supportive. Tom is the second child. We have one daughter, Frances.
She
Tom.
got us this table.
Yeah, Tom, Joe, Peter, and Anthony. So
Yes, we
yeah.
will see you next time, next week, bright and early. Thank you for watching, and God bless.
God bless.